How would you distinguish between being a moderate and being a centrist? Because you use those terms somewhat differently.
Yeah, right. So that's what I argue is a common misconception, right? That like when moderates are, slagged, it's usually with the implication that they have to be a centrist, right? And so what I try to do through a variety of historical examples, right? And then through by, considering some statistical studies of where people fall across the political spectrum, that a much larger variety of people plausibly qualify as moderates, right? And so in order to figure out who's a moderate, I argue in the book, we have to engage in some kind of reasoned use of evidence to determine, okay, well, what does distinguish someone who's a moderate from someone who's a radical, right? And so I lay out four traits that I argue that if we look historically and if we look at some data, we see that people who we agree are moderates tend to possess these to a much higher degree than people who are radicals. But then I say, look, right, it's possible to combine these four qualities, which are, commitment to pragmatism, pluralism, compromise, and gradual change, with having some fairly radical ideals, right? And so this is why we often talk about people being a moderate progressive or a moderate conservative. And then I talk about historically how whether someone is a moderate really depends on the social context in which they are, and a context of comparison. Like, during the French Revolution, the Girondins were considered a moderate revolutionary party. But if you were to compare the Girondins to, the ancient regime, right, the French regime that existed prior to the revolution, the Girondins would have been, been considered radical revolutionaries. And so I argue someone can be radical in some respects, but simultaneously be moderate in other respects.